Hi there, I'm Timothy Linsdau, video producer and a Christian. I'm also a history lover. World War II is full of stories, just millions of stories. But some of the ones that happened behind the curtains, if you will, have to do with the secret work that the British did in finding people that could work through mathematical patterns and the mathematics of war, and developing machines that could decode the Enigma machines that the Nazis had created to send coded messages. And they figured all of this out that helped to defeat the Nazis. And there were a lot of women that worked on these projects. There's a PBS show called Bletchley Circle that deals with about 4 women that worked in that area of secret warfare. Now, there was a fellow by the name of Gilbert Roberts who put together a team of young women whose strategic war games simulations uncovered why German U-boats were so adept at taking out British ships in the early years of the war. More than 1,200 in 1940 alone, with relatively few losses to the Nazis. Now, the fascinating thing to me about that warfare, that stuff was taking place right off of the U.S. shores when we weren't even in the war yet. I mean, how would we react to that now? This book of nonfiction reads in part like a thriller, and the name of the book is A Game of Birds and Wolves, that was written about this particular group of people that were put together. Gilbert put this team together after he had been relieved of his work in the British Navy, but they because of tuberculosis, it wasn't disobeying orders or anything. It was because he was sick, but they started calling everybody back they could get because it was looking pretty precarious with the war in the early years with Britain defending themselves. But they called him back to conduct training exercises in 1940, but he was upgraded the next year to tasks that would prove his tactical prowess. He was charged with figuring out how the U-boats were succeeding, devising a strategy to stop them. Among hundreds of young women who had joined the Women's Royal Naval Service, a handful were chosen for their math and tactical skills to work with Roberts. The women, some in their late teens, were dubbed Wrens, My Wrens, by Roberts. He and the Wrens created a battleship-like game that used after-battle reports and detection systems, board game simulations, and help from the Enigma machine created at Bletchley. Part of that was learning the encrypted messages by the Germans, who famously cracked them. They were famously cracked by the mathematician Alan Turing of Britain. Only in movies and trite fiction do inventive, creative enthusiasts effectively sell a book like this, so that it isn't boring. But it's when you realize how difficult it was for Britain at the beginning of this war, World War II, things were not looking very good. There's this little island and this empire of the Nazis against them, and it was looking pretty rough. Karl Doughnuts, an admiral who became the German head of the state briefly after the war, had been a U-boat ace during World War I, and was in charge of creating designs and tactics that could help Germany win the Second World War. He argued for and got more U-boats that could amass like a pack of wolves, tearing into the entire convoys of British ships that had no radar to detect submarine activity, and only some had early sonar devices. One tactic employed by several U-boat commanders was to take their crews inside the columns of convoy to attack, evading detection from sonar, which projected outward, not under. Rations were on the countdown clock of months and weeks as supply ships were targeted, and sunk at alarming rates. Coming from the U.S., we were supplying them as much as we could to avoid war. We were quiet about it, just trying to stay out of that war, but in the end we couldn't. So the sinking of the ships and for food and fuel and all of those things was really causing a lot of trouble in Britain. This Roberts, known for his tactical brilliance, had been the Navy's designated game designer and a naval commander in the 1930s. Recalled for service, he became head of the Western Approaches Tactical Unit in Liverpool, England. By the way, the home of the Beatles. Where he and the Wrens worked long hours, sometimes plotting sea movement strategies into the night. They eventually refined the game and its variations with the names like Raspberry and Half Raspberry for code words. The game covered a brown linoleum gymnasium-sized floor. Wooden models of ships were set into the map of the ocean and real-time detection technology. The floor was painted with grid lines. Each white line was spaced 10 inches apart to represent 1 nautical mile. Canvas covered enclosures circled the ocean. Each canvas had a peephole. The sheets were positioned so that when a player looked through the peephole, she could see the equivalent of the 5-mile view that the model ships would have had from the floor. Now, one team behind the canvas played escort ship captains, and the other played the U-boats. And each side took turns maneuvering escort ships, dropping depth charges, and U-boats dodging under the surface. Their progress was marked in colored chalk, with the Wrens looking through the peepholes could not detect. The escort ships moved were plotted with white chalk, which was visible through the peepholes. At the end of the game, the players sat in a circle and rehashed what had happened. Once they had the game truly seaworthy, playing it over and over again, Roberts and the Wrens demonstrated it to Admiral Percy Noble, commander of the Chief of Western Approaches, who had been condescending and skeptical of Roberts' assignment. As he watched the demonstrations, he and his staff seemed to sit forward in their chairs. So convinced of the accuracy of the game, Noble congratulated Roberts, asked a member of his staff to contact the Prime Minister Winston Churchill about a cardinal error in the anti-U-boat tactics. A new and immediate concerted counterattack will be signaled to the fleet within 24 hours, said the Admiral. The new Western Approaches convoy instructions became a Bible issued to all British escort officers as in American and Canadian vessels as well. Parkin writes, the author, before leaving the room, Noble turned to Roberts and said, "So on your 4th stripe, you have been promoted." Now giving new life as an active captain, Roberts with the Wrens demonstrated the game for visiting military officials. And even King George IV and turned the site into a school for the perfection of U-boat warfare. After the war, Roberts would play a role as a war crimes investigator in Germany, where he came face to face with Admiral Doughnuts of the Nazi Empire, if you will. Now, Roberts held his Wrens in full high esteem for their skill and intellect, and his detailed diaries of the work they did together was one-man campaign for posterity. So it was an incredible job that they did to help defeat the Nazis. I've read some of the casualty statistics for the U-boats. In the early years, they were very successful, if you will, in their warfare on Allied shipping. But in the end, Nazi sub-force lost probably over 75% of their fleet and sailors. So they suffered greatly. Once the Allies figured out how to attack them, and through these programs of these war games and understanding how to crack the Enigma codes of the Nazis, they were able to defeat them and to finally bring that war to a close. Not without a lot of suffering and death, but they got the job done. So when you think that if you do, in some bigoted form that women didn't have a lot to do with winning that war. Check out this book, A Game of Birds and Wolves. Also, read about Bletchley Circle and how they were able to break these German codes, and just all the fascinating work that they did. These people were really bright people. A lot of them women. They were very adept at mathematics and patterns, and it's an amazing story. And the sad thing about a lot of those people, if not all, had to take a vow of silence. They could not tell anybody about the work they had done in helping to win that war up until the 1970s, well over 30 years after the end of the war, where they finally recognized. So, and here's a more opportunity for them to be recognized. So there's a little bit of history of how the British women helped to defeat the Nazis in World War II. Like and comment, subscribe to my channel if you would, and just get out there and make it a great day.